Prudence dictates that you shouldn't just wing off every time the government passes a small tax, but when there is a long train of abuses, then you have the right to defend yourself.
If you really want to stay free and remain free, you have to be a little bit paranoid, and that's a good thing.
It's hard for 20th and 21st century people to understand what it means to think, live, and act on moral principles.
There's a lot of talk today about conspiracy theories, and one of the most striking little tidbits in the book was that for the founding fathers, there was a conspiracy theory angle in some of that. It was quite striking. It was interesting to learn that basically the founding fathers subscribed to a kind of conspiracy theory. They were convinced that the British were engaged in a systematic plot to enslave them with a kind of purposeful, malevolent intent. And this was interesting because it wasn't necessarily clear that that was the case, so that they were reading between the lines, connecting the dots as the conspiracy theorists do. I'll tell you, reading your book, it definitely struck me as rather paranoid. You talk about how they thought they were the freest people in the world, but just a few years later, they claimed that they were being enslaved, not just by accident, but by systematic machinations against them. Is this just the paranoid style of American politics, or what's going on here, especially with connecting that to the prevalence of conspiracy theories today?
Yeah, so you could say that in the context of American history, American revolutionaries were the first conspiratorialists, but I don't view that in a negative way, right? I actually, in a certain sense, I view that in a very positive way, right? But in order to understand how they understood the concept conspiracy, and they used the word conspiracy. They claimed that there was a conspiracy to deny their liberties, right? But they didn't just wing off things. They actually provided evidence. Take the Declaration of Independence, right? You could say that the Declaration of Independence is a conspiratorial document, right? What Jefferson and the other drafters of the Declaration do is they lay out, right, the evidence, right? They're not just winging off with these crazy ideas, but they present real evidence, right? And the evidence goes from 1764 until when you get the British Parliament passing this string of laws, this legislation, and the argument, and certainly in the Declaration, and which they get from Locke, is that one act, let's say the Stamp Act, which is the most famous piece of legislation passed by the British Parliament, one act which infringes on our rights and liberties is not a form of tyranny, right? And two may not be. But when you get in a very short period of time, in a truncated 10-year period, a series of laws that are violating their rights in all kinds of different ways, then it's not unreasonable to assume not only that their rights are being violated, but that there is an approaching tyranny on their rights and liberties. And the other thing that's important to note, and why we in the 20th or the 21st centuries now use terms like the paranoid style to describe American revolutionaries, is that it's hard for 20th and 21st century people to understand what it means to live and to think, live, and act on moral principles, right? So one of the things that I try to argue in the book is that American revolutionaries, they bridged the traditional dichotomy between principles and practice, between theories and action. And they did it through this concept of the spirit of liberty, right? And this idea of the spirit of liberty is a jealous spirit, and it's jealous of one's freedom. And when one sees your freedom being violated, in many ways, like we do today, it's not paranoid. It's not unreasonable to defend yourself, to defend those principles. Now, I will say that after the Declaration of Independence lays out its four self-evident truths, the fourth of which is the right to revolution, the very next word of the following sentence begins with the word prudence. Prudence dictates that you shouldn't just wing off every time the government passes a small tax, or if they every now and then violate a principle. But when there is a long train of abuses, as the Declaration says, that all point in one direction, then you have the right to defend yourself. And that's precisely what they did. And so my own view is that that's not paranoid. That's prudent.
So only the paranoid stay free in the long run is basically what you're saying. It's good to be paranoid. It's good to be paranoid. If you really want to stay free and remain free, you have to be a little bit paranoid, and that's a good thing.
Well, I see your point, although I just wouldn't use myself, I wouldn't use the word paranoid, right?
Okay,
Because paranoid suggests a psychological disorder. And
sure.
the revolutionary generation, Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, these were not paranoid people. These were people who loved their freedom and were willing to defend it.